Hey everyone, welcome back to English in Fluency. I'm Alex, and I am so glad you're here today. Seriously, I mean that. Because what we're going to do in this lesson is something that I think is going to completely change the way you listen to English. Not just a little bit, a lot. And once you understand this, once it clicks for you, you're going to start hearing things in conversations, in movies, in podcasts, that you never noticed before. And that feeling, that moment when something finally makes sense, that's exactly why I love doing this. So stay with me, because this one is going to be really, really good. Now, before we dive in, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about this honestly. Have you ever been listening to someone speak English? Maybe a native speaker, maybe even another learner, and you understood all the words. You knew what every single word meant. But somehow you still felt a little lost? Like you missed something? Like the conversation moved forward, and you weren't quite sure what the most important part was? If that sounds familiar, you are not alone. That is one of the most common problems that intermediate English learners face. And today, we are going to fix it. The reason this happens is actually really interesting. It's not about vocabulary. It's not even about grammar. It's about something called emphasis. It's about the way speakers choose to highlight certain words or ideas to make them stand out. Native speakers do this constantly, without even thinking about it. It's automatic for them. But for learners, it can feel invisible. You hear the sounds, but you don't always catch the message. Today, I'm going to make that invisible thing very, very visible. Or, I guess I should say, very, very audible. You'll start hearing it clearly. So what exactly is emphasis in English? Let me explain it in the simplest way possible. When you speak, not every word carries the same weight. Some words are more important than others. Some ideas are the main point, and others are just supporting details. Emphasis is the tool that speakers use to show you which is which. They use their voice, they use certain words and phrases, and they use the rhythm of their sentences to say, hey, listen carefully to this part. This is the important bit. And here's the thing. This is not just a nice skill to have. It is essential for real communication. Because when you understand how emphasis works, you can follow conversations much more easily. You know where to direct your attention. You don't get tired from trying to process every single word equally. Instead, you focus on what really matters, and the rest kind of fills in around it naturally. It's a bit like the difference between trying to look at an entire painting all at once versus knowing exactly where the artist wants your eyes to go first. Once you see it, everything makes so much more sense. Okay, so let's start with the most basic and most powerful form of emphasis in spoken English, which is stress. Stress is when a speaker makes a word or a syllable louder, longer, and sometimes a little higher in pitch. When you stress a word, you're basically putting a spotlight on it. You're saying, this word, right here, this is the one that matters. Let me give you an example. Imagine someone says, she didn't steal the money. Now, I've put the stress on the word steal. What does that tell you? It tells you that the important information here is about what she did or didn't do, the action. Maybe the listener was suggesting she stole something, and the speaker is correcting that idea. The stress on steal is doing all of that work. It's carrying the emotional weight of the whole sentence. But now, imagine the same words with a different stress. She didn't steal the money. Now the stress is on she. Suddenly, the sentence means something completely different. The important information has shifted. Now it's about who did or didn't steal the money. The speaker is suggesting that maybe someone else did it, but definitely not her. Same words, different stress, completely different message. This is why stress is so powerful. And this is why, if you miss the stress in a sentence, you might understand the words, but completely misunderstand the meaning. So as you're listening today, I really want you to practice noticing which words the speaker stresses. Don't just listen to what is said. Listen to how it's said. That how is where so much of the real meaning lives. Now, let's meet the people in our story today. Because we're going to be following some conversations and learning from real-life situations, I think that's the best way to understand how emphasis actually works in natural spoken English. So, let me introduce you to a few people. First, we have Maya. Maya is 32 years old, and she works as a project manager at a small technology company. She's organized, she's direct, and she tends to get frustrated when meetings go off track. She's the kind of person who always has a to-do list, and she takes great satisfaction in crossing things off it. Then there's Daniel. Daniel is 28, and he's a software developer who works on Maya's team. He's brilliant at his job, but sometimes gets a bit distracted by interesting problems that aren't necessarily the priority. He means well, he really does, but he and Maya have a different relationship with deadlines. We also have Sophia, who is Maya's closest friend, and also happens to work in a different department of the same company. Sophia is warm, funny, and very perceptive. She notices things about people that others tend to miss. She and Maya have lunch together almost every day, and their conversations are always full of energy. And finally, there's Mr. Tanaka, who is the director of the company. He's calm, thoughtful, and very strategic. When he speaks, people listen closely, because he doesn't say unnecessary things. Every word he chooses is deliberate, which, as you'll see, makes him a perfect example of someone who uses emphasis really, really effectively. All right, so let's start with our first scene. It's a Monday morning, and Maya has just arrived at the office. She's carrying her coffee. She's already thinking about the week ahead. And she runs into Daniel in the hallway near the coffee machine. Maya looks at him and says, "Daniel, I sent you 3 emails about the client report. 3. And you still haven't responded?" Now, I want you to notice something about the way Maya says that. She says the word 3 twice, and the second time she says it alone. Just the word, 3. That repetition with isolation, that's a form of emphasis. She's not just giving him information, she's making him feel the weight of that number. She wants him to understand that 3 is not 1. 3 is not a small thing. 3 emails is significant, and he should have noticed. Daniel winces a little because he can hear that emphasis. He knows he's in trouble. He says, I know, I'm really sorry. I was buried in the new project, and I honestly didn't realize how much time had passed." Notice something there too. Daniel says the word honestly. That word is doing a very specific job. When people add words like honestly, truly, really, or I have to say at the beginning or middle of a sentence, they are emphasizing sincerity. They're saying, I'm not making excuses. I genuinely mean this. It's a way of putting extra weight on the truthfulness of what follows. So when Daniel says, I honestly didn't realize, He's emphasizing that his mistake was not intentional. He's trying to soften Maya's frustration with a word that signals genuine emotion. Maya sighs. She's not totally convinced, but she appreciates the honesty. She says, "Okay, look, I need that report by Wednesday, not Friday, not end of the week, Wednesday. Can you do that?" This is beautiful. Look at what Maya does here. She says Wednesday, and then she immediately tells you what it is not. Not Friday, not end of the week. This is a technique where you emphasize something by contrasting it with what it is not. By saying what something isn't, you make what it is stand out even more sharply. When Maya says not Friday, she's telling Daniel, and also us, that there might have been some ambiguity before. Maybe he assumed the deadline was flexible. So she's cutting through that ambiguity by being extremely specific, and by removing all the other possibilities, she's making Wednesday feel very final and very clear. Daniel nods and says, "Wednesday, I've got it, I promise." He repeats the word Wednesday back to her. And that repetition is also a form of emphasis. When someone echoes back a key word from what you just said, they're showing you that they heard it, that they understood it, that it landed. It's a confirmation signal. And it actually makes Maya feel slightly better, because she can see that the important word, the deadline, has been received. Okay, let's pause here for a moment and practice. I want you to do something. Think about a time when you had to make sure someone understood something really important. Maybe it was a meeting time. Maybe it was a price. Maybe it was an instruction. Now, think about how you said it. Did you repeat it? Did you slow down? Did you say the other options and cross them off? All of those things are forms of emphasis, and native speakers do them constantly in everyday conversation. Now, let's move forward in our story. It's Tuesday afternoon, and Maya and Sophia are having lunch together. They're sitting outside in the courtyard, and the sun is warm, and they're both a little tired from a busy morning. Sophia takes a bite of her sandwich and says, "You seem stressed. Is it the Daniel thing?" Maya laughs, a little helplessly, and says, "Partly. But actually, what's really stressing me out is the presentation on Thursday. Mr. Tanaka is going to be there, and I want it to be perfect." Now, notice the phrase, "what's really stressing me out." The word "really" here is what we call an intensifier. It makes the feeling stronger, and the way it's positioned in the middle of the phrase, just before stressing, gives it a lot of weight. But there's something even more interesting happening here. Maya says, "partly first," which tells us that she's acknowledging Daniel is a factor, but then she pivots with the word "but actually." But and actually together are like a spotlight being turned in a new direction. They're saying, yes, there's that thing, but here is the more important thing. Here is what I really want to focus on. Those little transition words are guiding the listener's attention from one idea to a more important idea. Sophia nods slowly. She's processing this. Then she says, "Okay, so what's the part that you're most worried about?" Maya thinks for a moment. Then she says, "The data section, specifically the numbers from Q3. They're not great, and I need to present them in a way that's honest, but also shows the potential going forward." There's a beautiful emphasis move here. Maya says specifically. That word is doing a powerful job. When someone says specifically in the middle of a conversation, they're zooming in. They're saying, "I'm not talking about the whole thing, I'm talking about this one particular part of it." It narrows the focus and tells the listener exactly where to direct their attention. If you hear someone say specifically in a conversation, "Pay attention," they're about to tell you the most important detail. Sophia taps her fingers on the table. She says, "I think the key is not to hide the numbers. Present them clearly, but then immediately move to what you're doing about it. That's what matters most to him. Not the problem, the solution." I want to highlight what Sophia says here, because it contains one of the most powerful emphasis structures in English. Not the problem, the solution. She splits a contrast into two very short, very sharp phrases. Not this, this. This is an incredibly effective technique because it creates a kind of rhythm, and that rhythm makes the second item feel almost inevitable, like the natural and obvious conclusion. Not the problem, the solution. When you hear that kind of structure in English, the second item is almost always the main point. The first item is being dismissed, so the second can be elevated. Maya's eyes light up a little. She says, "You're right. That's actually exactly what I needed to hear." And now look at "actually" in that sentence. She says, "That's actually exactly what I needed to hear." Actually here is used as a positive surprise emphasis marker. It's saying, I wasn't necessarily expecting to feel this way, but I do. It adds warmth and authenticity to what she's saying. It's the difference between saying, "That's what I needed to hear," which is nice, but a bit flat, versus "That's actually what I needed to hear," which feels more like a genuine emotional response. Let's pause again and think about this together. Have you noticed how much work these small, common words are doing? Words like actually, specifically, really, not this, but that. These aren't difficult vocabulary words. You've probably known them for years. But understanding what they do in terms of emphasis, understanding why a speaker chooses them, and what they're signaling, that's a whole different layer of understanding. And that's the layer we're building today. Now, let's move to our next scene. It's Wednesday morning. Daniel has stayed late the night before, worked incredibly hard, and he has delivered the client report to Maya. She reads it over quickly at her desk, and then she walks over to his workspace. She says, "Daniel, this is good. This is really good." That tiny repetition, "this is good, this is really good," is very intentional in spoken English. When someone says something positive and then repeats it with an intensifier like "really," they're not just being nice. They're showing that their first response was genuine but understated. The really good version is the truth. The good version was just the initial reaction. So the repetition with intensification tells you the emotional truth behind the words. Daniel looks genuinely relieved. He says, "I'm so glad. I was honestly pretty nervous about it." And Maya smiles and says, "You should have just told me you needed more time. That's all I needed to know. Just that." Look at that. Just that. Just is another emphasis word that doesn't get enough attention. When Maya says "that's all I needed to know," just that, the word "just" is minimizing the request to make a point. She's saying, the bar was this small. Just tell me. All I needed was this simple thing. The just makes the request feel easy and obvious in retrospect, which also gently reinforces that Daniel made it harder than it needed to be by not communicating. But it's not angry. It's said with understanding. The just here is almost tender. Daniel says, "I know. I think I just assumed you'd figure out I was swamped." And this is a beautiful real-life moment, because Maya looks at him and says, "I can't read your mind, Daniel. I can only work with what you tell me." I can't read your mind. That sentence has emphasis built into its structure through a very important word, can't. When you stress a negative like can't, won't, don't, or can't, you're often correcting a false assumption. Maya is saying, maybe you believed I could sense your situation without you telling me. Let me correct that. I can't. The emphasis on the negative corrects the wrong belief and replaces it with the right one. This is so common in spoken English, and it's one of the reasons that listening for negatives and how they're said can tell you a lot about the real message. Now let's jump forward to Thursday, the big presentation day. Maya is in the conference room setting up her slides. Mr. Tanaka arrives a few minutes early, which surprises her. She wasn't expecting him yet. He looks at her slides briefly and then says, "I saw the Q3 numbers in the preliminary report. I want to hear your take on what happened." His voice is calm. Not alarmed, not disappointed, just curious and direct. But notice how he phrases it. He doesn't say, "Tell me about Q3. He says, "I want to hear your take on what happened." The phrase "your take" is doing something very important here. It's emphasizing that he doesn't just want the data. He wants her interpretation of the data. He wants to know how she thinks. By using the word take, which means your personal perspective or analysis, he's elevating the importance of her judgment. That's an implicit emphasis on her thinking, not just the facts. Maya takes a breath and says, "The numbers were lower than projected. I won't pretend otherwise. But what I think is more important to focus on is why it happened and what we've already started doing differently." Look at the phrase, "I won't pretend otherwise." This is a powerful self-emphasis move. She's saying, "I'm not going to sugarcoat this." By proactively acknowledging that she could have minimized the bad news, but choosing not to, she's actually building trust and credibility. And then the pivot to, but what I think is more important, is a classic emphasis transition. She acknowledges the problem and then immediately redirects attention to the solution or the insight. But what I think is more important, that phrase is doing the work of saying, yes, that thing matters, but this other thing matters even more. Mr. Tanaka listens carefully. He doesn't interrupt. When she finishes speaking, he's quiet for a moment, and then he says, "Good. That's exactly the right framing." Exactly. There's that word again. When Mr. Tanaka says exactly the right framing, he's using exactly as a strong affirmation. He's not just saying good or okay. He's saying this is precisely correct, not approximately, not close, but exactly. And because Mr. Tanaka is known as someone who chooses his words carefully, that exactly lands very heavily. It carries more weight coming from him than it might from someone else. The presentation goes well. After it ends, and the other team members have left the room, Sophia catches Maya in the hallway and says, "How did it go? Tell me everything." Maya laughs and says, "It went well. Better than I expected, actually. He said I had the right framing." And Sophia grabs her arm and says, "He said that? Those exact words?" Notice what Sophia is doing here. She asks, "Those exact words?" She's emphasizing the word exact. She wants to confirm that this isn't just a general positive impression, but that Mr. Tanaka literally said that, word for word. This is a very human way of emphasizing the significance of a direct quote. When someone asks, "Did they actually say that?" or "those exact words," they're saying, "This is important enough that I want to make sure it's accurate and not exaggerated." Maya says, his exact words were, "That's exactly the right framing." So yes. And Sophia does a little victory jump in the hallway, which makes a couple of passing colleagues look at them curiously, and both of them laugh. All right, let's stop here and talk about something that connects all of these examples together. Because I want to make sure you're not just enjoying the story, but actually taking the English tools with you when you leave this lesson. There are several key ways that speakers emphasize information in English, and we've seen most of them already in action. Let me walk you through them so they're very clear in your mind. The first is word stress. This is when a speaker puts extra loudness, length, or pitch on a specific word in a sentence. This word is the most important word in that sentence, and the stress is the speaker's way of showing you that. When you listen to someone speak, try to notice which words feel heavier or louder. Those are the ones carrying the main message. The second is repetition. When a speaker repeats a word or phrase, especially immediately after saying it, they're underlining it. They want it to stay in your mind. This is good. This is really good. 3 emails, 3. Repetition is simple, but extremely effective, and it's everywhere in natural conversation. The third is contrast with negatives. Saying what something is not before or after saying what it is creates a very strong emphasis. Not Friday, Wednesday. Not the problem, the solution. The contrast makes the target idea feel sharp and clear because everything else has been removed. The fourth is specific emphasis words. Words like specifically, exactly, particularly, especially, and above all are almost always followed by the most important piece of information in a sentence. When you hear any of those words, focus sharply on what comes next, because that is the key detail. The fifth is intensifiers. Words like really, very, so, extremely, and completely make the word that follows feel bigger or more important. They turn up the volume on the idea. The sixth is contrast phrases and pivot words. Phrases like, "But what matters more is," however, the key point is, "What's really important here is," and the main thing is, all signal that the speaker is about to move from a less important idea to a more important one. They're essentially saying, "I've told you the background, now here's the actual point." And the seventh is pacing and pausing. This one is harder to teach through text, but it's incredibly important. When a speaker slows down before or after a key word, or when they pause briefly before saying something significant, that change in pace acts like a spotlight. It says, "Wait, pay attention, this is coming." And then they say it. Let's get back to our story, because there's more to explore. It's now Friday afternoon, and the week is almost over. Maya is wrapping up some emails when she gets a message from Mr. Tanaka, asking if she has a few minutes to talk. She feels a little flutter of nervousness, even though the presentation went well. She goes up to his office on the 4th floor. He invites her to sit down and says, "I wanted to follow up on something you said during the presentation. You mentioned that the team had already started doing things differently. I want to hear more about that." What Mr. Tanaka does here is a form of emphasis called referencing back. He quotes back something she said earlier. You mentioned that the team had already started doing things differently, and by doing so, he's telling her which part of what she said mattered most to him. When someone references back something specific that you said, pay attention. They're telling you what stood out. They're revealing their priorities. The thing they chose to repeat is the thing they're most interested in. Maya is slightly surprised because she'd thought of that line almost as a detail. But clearly, it wasn't a detail to him. She explains how the team has started weekly check-ins, how they've adjusted their timeline structure, and how they're building in more communication touchpoints with the client. As she talks, he listens and occasionally nods. And then, when she finishes, he says, "That's the direction I want the whole division to move. Not just your team, the whole division. Not just your team, the whole division." Can you hear it? That's our contrast with extension pattern again. He says not just the smaller group, but the bigger group. This is how speakers show scale and significance. They start with what you might have assumed was the extent of something, and then they expand it to show you it's actually larger, more important, or more reaching than you thought. When you hear not just X, but Y, the Y is almost always the more surprising and more important part. Maya stares at him for a moment. She says, "You want to implement this across the whole division?" She's echoing his key phrase back to him, which we talked about earlier. But notice she adds a slight upward tone to her sentence, because she's turning it into a question. She's confirming that she heard correctly. That echoing of key phrases is a skill in itself. It shows you're listening. It shows you caught what was important. And it gives the other person a chance to confirm or clarify. He says, "That's exactly what I mean, and I'd like you to lead it." And there's exactly again. When Mr. Tanaka says that's exactly what I mean, he's doing several things at once. He's confirming her understanding is correct. He's saying there's no ambiguity here. And he's reinforcing that his original statement was complete and intentional, not something that needs softening or qualification. The word exactly is closing the door on any possible misunderstanding. Maya walks out of that meeting a little stunned, honestly. And later that afternoon, when she and Sophia are walking to the parking lot together, she tells Sophia everything. Sophia listens with wide eyes and then says, "Wait, he didn't just compliment your presentation. He actually gave you a new project. A big one." Notice the not just structure again. Sophia uses it to reframe what happened. She's saying, the compliment was already good, but that's not actually the main thing that happened. The main thing was the project offer. The not just is separating the less important part from the more important part, putting the more significant piece in focus. Maya nods slowly. "I know. I'm still processing it. I think this is actually the biggest thing that's happened in my career here." Actually, the biggest thing. Using "actually" before a big claim softens the boldness of the statement slightly, while also confirming its truth. And the superlative, "the biggest thing," tells you this is not just bigger than some things, it's bigger than all of them. Superlatives are another form of emphasis. The best, the most important, the key point, the main reason. These words signal that what follows is not just significant. It is the top of the significance scale. Sophia squeezes her arm and says, "You earned it. You prepared. You were honest. And you focused on the right things." And that last sentence, "you focused on the right things," is almost like a summary of everything we've been talking about today. Focusing on the right things. That's what emphasis in listening is all about. It's about knowing where to direct your attention when someone is speaking. It's about hearing not just the words, but the structure around the words, the stress, the contrast, the pivot phrases, the intensifiers, all of it. that's giving you information about what matters most. Okay, now I want to do something a little different. I want to give you some practice. Not just passive practice, but the kind of active practice that really builds a new skill. I'm going to describe a few short conversations, and after each one, I want you to think about what was emphasized and why. I'll give you the conversation, I'll pause, and then I'll tell you what I see. But really, before I get to my answer, I want you to think about it yourself, even if you're not sure. Especially if you're not sure, because that moment of trying is where the learning happens. Here's the first one. A woman named Clara is on the phone with a customer service representative. She says, "I didn't call to complain. I called to get this fixed." Now, pause. What's emphasized? What's the most important part of what she said? Think about it. Okay, the emphasis here is on the contrast between complain and fixed. I didn't call to complain. I called to get this fixed. She uses the repetition of the phrase "I called to," which creates a rhythmic structure. And the contrast between the negative first action and the positive second action tells you exactly what her purpose is. She's not interested in expressing frustration. She wants a result. The not structure removes one interpretation, and the positive structure puts the real one in its place. The emphasis is, my goal is resolution, not venting. Here's the second one. A man named Oliver is talking to his friend about a decision he made. He says, "I thought about it a long time, a really long time. And in the end, I chose what felt right, not what was easy." What's emphasized? The emphasis is in two places. First, the repetition and intensification of a long time. Then a really long time tells you that the decision-making process was serious and effortful. He's not telling you this was impulsive. He's telling you he invested time and thought. And then the contrast at the end, not what was easy, but what felt right, puts the values-based reasoning in the spotlight. He could have chosen the easy path. He didn't. The not what was easy makes the what felt right feel meaningful and deliberate. The emphasis is on integrity and reflection. Here's the third one. Two colleagues are talking. One of them, Priya, says to the other, "The deadline isn't the problem. The problem is that we don't have the right information yet." What do you notice? This one uses repetition of the phrase, "the problem," but with an interesting reversal. She names one thing and says it isn't the problem, and then immediately names the actual problem. The problem is being negated, and the second one is being confirmed. This denial-then-affirmation structure is extremely clear and direct. It cuts through any possible confusion about what the real issue is. The emphasis is, I know you think it's about time. It's not. It's about information. That is the real obstacle. Now let me add one more thing before we close out this lesson because I think it's really important. All the skills we've talked about today, noticing stress, hearing contrast phrases, recognizing intensifiers, catching repetition, all of these improve when you practice listening with intention. And that means listening differently from how most people listen. Most people, when they listen, they're just trying to understand. But what I want you to do is listen for meaning on two levels at the same time. Level 1 is the content. What is actually being said? What are the facts, the events, the ideas? Level 2 is the emphasis. What is the speaker choosing to make stand out? Where are they putting their energy and their focus? What do they want you to feel is most important? When you can listen on both levels simultaneously, your comprehension just explodes. You go from understanding about 70 or 75% of what's said to understanding 90 or 95%. Not because you suddenly know more vocabulary, but because you're reading the full message, not just the surface words. So here's my challenge to you for this week. I want you to pick one conversation in English every day. It could be from a podcast, a TV show, a YouTube video, a movie, anything. And I want you to listen to it once normally. Then I want you to listen to it again, specifically hunting for emphasis. Find 3 moments where you can identify how the speaker is emphasizing something. Write them down. Even just a note on your phone. This word was stressed. This contrast phrase was used. This repetition happened. Do that for 5 days. Just 5 days. And I promise you, your listening will feel different on day 6. You'll start doing it automatically. Your brain will start catching these things without you having to remind it to look. Because that's the beautiful thing about the human brain. Once you understand how something works, once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. You start noticing emphasis everywhere. In English, in your own first language, in the way people around you talk. It becomes part of how you hear the world. Let's come back to Maya one more time, because I want to give you a real ending to this story that ties everything together. It's the following Monday. Maya has spent the weekend thinking about Mr. Tanaka's offer. And when she arrives at the office, she has a plan. She gathers her team, which includes Daniel and a few others, and she tells them what happened. She says, "So I have something to share, something important." She pauses. Mr. Tanaka has asked us, specifically our team, to lead a new initiative for the entire division. This isn't a small thing. This is a real opportunity, and I believe we're ready for it. I want you to hear everything that's happening in just those few sentences. She starts by setting up the importance before she reveals what it is. Something to share, something important. This is a classic pre-emphasis move. By telling you something big is coming before telling you what it is, she creates anticipation. She makes you lean in, and then she pauses, which amplifies that anticipation even further. Then she says specifically, our team. The word specifically is zooming in, narrowing the focus, making it clear that this isn't a coincidence or a general announcement. This was a deliberate choice. Their team was chosen. Then she uses the not just structure in a slightly different way. This isn't a small thing. She negates the possibility that this could be dismissed or minimized. She's pre-answering the doubt, in case anyone might think this isn't a big deal. By saying it's not small, she makes the path clear for saying what it actually is, which is a real opportunity. And then she says, I believe we're ready for it. That word believe is doing something very particular. It's not saying we're definitely ready, and it's not saying I hope we're ready. It's saying I have considered this. I have thought about you. I have thought about what I've seen from this team. And my conclusion, my genuine assessment, is readiness. The believe word makes it personal and considered, not just encouraging and empty. Daniel raises his hand. He says, "What's the first step?" And Maya smiles. She says, "Honestly, the first step is that everyone tells me what they actually need to do their best work. Not what sounds good, not what's easy. What you actually need." There it is. Honestly at the start, not what sounds good, not what's easy, what you actually need. Everything we've learned today, wrapped up in 2 sentences. The honesty marker for sincerity, the double negation to clear away the less important things, and the word actually to signal that what follows is the real, true, essential thing. This is how emphasis works in real life. It's not complicated. It's not academic. It's just people finding ways to tell you which parts of what they're saying really matter. And now you can hear it. You know, I started this lesson by saying that once this clicks for you, you're going to start hearing things you never noticed before. And I genuinely believe that. Because the thing about emphasis is that it was always there. In every conversation you've listened to in English, every movie, every podcast, every lesson, the speakers were always doing these things, stressing words, contrasting ideas, using pivot phrases. You just didn't have a name for it or a framework for noticing it. And now you do. Now you have the lens. And that lens is going to make every English conversation you hear from this point forward a little bit clearer, a little bit richer, a little bit more accessible. So before you go, let me just do a quick recap of the main tools we covered today, because I want them to stay fresh in your mind. Speakers use stress to put a spotlight on the most important word in a sentence. They use repetition to underline things they want you to remember. They use contrast with negatives to eliminate wrong interpretations and confirm the right one. They use specific emphasis words like specifically, exactly, and particularly to zoom in on the key detail. They use intensifiers like really, very, and so to make words feel bigger and more significant. They use pivot phrases like, but what really matters, and the key point is to move attention from background to foreground. And they use pacing and pausing to create moments of anticipation before something important. These are your tools. Use them when you listen. Notice them. Let them guide your attention to what really matters. And now, here's your call to action for today. And I really hope you do this. Go back and listen to any part of this lesson again. Any part that felt interesting or that you want to replay. And this time, don't listen for vocabulary or grammar. Listen for the emphasis moves. See how many of the tools we talked about you can spot. You're going to find them everywhere. Then, come back. Leave a comment if you're watching or listening somewhere with comments. Tell me one emphasis technique you noticed. Tell me where you heard it. Tell me why you think the speaker used it. I read every comment, every single one. And I genuinely love hearing about those little moments when things click for learners. If this lesson helped you, please share it with someone else who's learning English. Because this kind of insight, the kind that goes beneath the surface of the words, it's the kind that actually changes how you understand the language, not just for this week, but forever. And if you're new here, welcome to English in Fluency. Every lesson we do here is built around one idea, that real fluency isn't just about knowing more words, it's about understanding more deeply. It's about hearing the full message, not just the surface. It's about being genuinely comfortable in real English conversations, not just in tests or exercises. That's what we're building together, every single lesson. I'm Alex. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I'll see you in the next lesson, and until then, keep listening, keep noticing, and remember, every conversation in English is a chance to get better. So make the most of it. Take care. Bye for now.